Here's what's coming up on today's show.
I mentioned the shares have to get journaled or transferred in kind to a non-qualified brokerage account. Everything else in the account, the non-NUA shares, are typically rolled over to an IRA. Bottom line is you have to empty the 401k. Lump sum distribution, everything's got to be out of the account before the end of the year.
This is the Retire Happy podcast with John Amarino, fiduciary financial advisor at Securus Financial in the San Diego area, and Thomas O'Connell, president of International Financial Advisory Group, Inc. in Rockaway, New Jersey. Together, they'll be keeping retirement happy from coast to coast.
Welcome back to another episode of the Retire Happy podcast. I am your host on the West Coast, John Amarino, joined by my esteemed co-host on the East Coast, Tom O'Connell. Tommy, how you doing, buddy?
I'm doing great, John. How you doing?
Good. We had a special weekend here for our family. Well, mostly the boys. The girls didn't get to participate, but I have a friend that works for Major League Baseball, so we were able to surprise Jake and his two best friends with field passes for batting practice, and it was, as a dad, I've been on the field before working games when I was in law enforcement, but as a dad to sit there and watch Jake and his buddies just, live out a dream that even, most adults haven't lived out. It was awesome. And the day before he was doing his batting practice in the morning before school, and he just randomly, he had no idea this thing was going to happen. He said, "You know what, Dad, on my bucket list is to shake Manny Machado's." And, he told Manny that, and Manny's like, "Let's do it." And so he got to shake his hand, and even that night he said, "Thanks, Dad, if this was like the best day of my life." So that was our weekend.
Yeah, that's pretty cool. Those videos that you put out there were pretty cool too. The only thing I could say that possibly would have made it better if it was at Yankee Stadium.
Yeah, that would be cool. But it wasn't. So we have another phenomenal episode for you. In the past, we've had the great Ed Slott on, and today we are going to talk about net unrealized appreciation, also known as NUA, and we have Ed Slott's expert on this, Andy Ives, and I'm just really excited to have Andy on the show. He's got 25 years of experience in the financial industry. He's had positions as relationship managers at a mutual fund companies. He's been the regional sales director, where he's partnered closely with advisors and plan sponsors. And then 5 years ago, he decided to remove the sales hat and go to the education hat. And he's really the IRA technical analyst for the great Ed Slott and Company. So he speaks nationally and, trains thousands of advisors. He's a CFP and a true expert on NUA, and we are excited to have Mr. Andy Ives on the show.
And our special guest this episode, Andy Ives, an IRA analyst for Ed Slott and Company, LLC.
Hey, John and Tom, great. Thanks to be here. I appreciate it.
Yeah, it's great to have you. Tommy, another great, this is another Tom O'Connell grab with his relationship with Ed Slott. So great work, Tommy.
Well, thanks. Andy has been with Ed Slott for quite a while, as have I. And I can tell you, every time Andy speaks, I'm learning something. So I'm really excited to have this. John, both you and I have run into a couple of clients, very recently, that have had this situation. And so that's why we thought it was important, because we're just finding more and more people that come across this.
Yeah. Literally, I'm dealing with our custodian on the stock certificates part of the NUA. Not that we did the NUA, we'll get into that a little bit later. But yeah, this is becoming more and more prevalent, not even with the highly compensated executives, but just employees. So definitely definitely looking forward to hearing what Andy has to say with especially his expertise. So why don't we jump right into it?
I was just going to say, without tooting our own horn, we don't come across many advisors who are very familiar with this either. So, I think this is a great one for today.
No, and Tom, you made a great point. And from the comprehensive financial planning perspective, and the designations that Tommy and I have worked on, the extra training at Slott. I mean, Tommy's been one of the original members, right, Tommy?
Yep, second graduating class.
So the amount of knowledge that we're trying to bring to our clients, because investments are important. We've said it all the time, but it really is a small slice of the pie, and it's these advanced planning strategies like the NUA that can add value to your portfolio regardless of market performance. And again, Tommy, you hit it on the dot. There's a lot of advisors out there just focusing on investments and products, not strategies. And you're right. When it comes to NUA, when it comes to non-qualified or incentive stock options, really, I mean, in my analysis, I'd probably say less than 10% of advisors are even giving good advice or have good knowledge on it. So we're looking to bring the expert of the 10% onto you. So let's get started.
Yeah, those are all good intro conversations and comments. I would agree with you that not many advisors know about it. We speak all over the country, and when I get to the NUA section of our training manual, I get a lot of blank stares when I talk to people out there, and it pains me to see that, because I can only imagine that the end user clients of theirs that get the short end of the stick, if they're not taught about NUA, if they don't learn about it, if they're not informed of the possibility of NUA being an option with their rollover. So we'll get into the weeds, certainly, of how it works and who's a candidate. But you also, John, made a great comment about it's not just the executives. You got people out there that have been working at a company at maybe a lower level position, but they've been there for 30 years, and they've been pumping, every pay period, they're pumping money into their account, and every pay period they're buying company stock. And next thing you know, they get $1 million, and they've got some kind of crazy low cost basis, a beautiful NUA candidate potentially. Doesn't have to be an executive. So certainly a lot of opportunities out there.
Yeah,
right.
Yeah. So we're throwing NUA out there like it's, a designation after, CFP, AIF, RMW, CPWA. The listeners are probably like, what is NUA? So NUA, net unrealized appreciation. Andy, what are we talking about?
Okay, yeah, there's so many acronyms in this business of ours. NUA, net unrealized appreciation. So it is applicable to 401k plans. Essentially, we're talking about company retirement plans. You can get into an ESOP and things like that, but when we say a company plan, typically we're talking about a 401k. You can't do it with an IRA, so just a 401k, and you have to have company stock in that 401k. So if you have company stock in your 401k, which a lot of people do, you might be a good candidate for the net unrealized appreciation tax strategy, because that's what it is. It's a tax strategy. You have to have essentially a low cost basis and a significant amount of stock in there. Now, significant is subjective. There is an art to this. It's not just a black box NUA. It's what I call the art and science of NUA. So we'll get into that as well. But essentially it is this. If I had, hypothetically, $1 million of company stock in my 401k, and if I was never told about NUA and this tax strategy, and I decided to roll that money over to an IRA, that's great. I can do that. $1 million just went from my 401k to my IRA, and now I withdraw it. I'm withdrawing it at ordinary income rates. So whatever my tax bracket is, now I'm just basically stacking dollars onto that and taking that money out at ordinary income rates. If, however, I was told about NUA and I had that $1 million in my 401k, and let's just say hypothetically my cost basis was $200,000. So the stock that I bought through my salary deferrals, I ended up paying $200,000 for it. But then over the years, over the 20 or 30 years that I've been working at this company, it has grown and appreciated to $1 million. If I proceed with the NUA strategy, basically I will pay ordinary income on the $200,000 and capital gains, long-term capital gains, on the $800,000 of appreciation. So that's what the NUA tax strategy is. It's basically taking what could be $1 million of ordinary income in this example and taking 800 grand and paying long-term capital gains. So it's that spread between the ordinary income bracket that you may be in and the long-term capital gains of essentially 15% for some people.
You hit the tax brackets right there. And again, when we're talking about adding performance to your portfolio, regardless of the market, I mean, there's a big difference between ordinary income rates of 24, 28% and 15% long-term capital gain rates. So in your example, that $1 million of ordinary income being shifted, the majority over to long-term capital gains, that is a substantial tax savings.
Potentially, yes, absolutely. That spread could be significant. 100%. You're absolutely right.
And you could spread that out over time as well, too, right? I mean, you don't have to. If you do this, you go through this process. You don't necessarily have to sell the stock right away.
That's right. So that's what's nice about the NUA strategy. So I'm going to keep looping back to that $1 million example because it's just clean and easy to talk about. So We have this person with $1 million and a $200,000 in basis. If they decide to pursue an NUA transaction, the company stock, that $1 million in company stock, would be transferred in kind to a non-qualified brokerage account. So they take a distribution from the 401k. It goes just to a regular brokerage account. It doesn't get rolled over to an IRA. It comes out of the 401k. When that transaction happens, when that distribution happens, they will pay ordinary income on the $200,000 of basis, which we said that's going to be due that year. So yeah, you are getting a bump of income, 200 grand ordinary income for that year. The 800,000 of appreciation, you can sell that whenever you want. If you want to sell it next week or a portion of it next week, you can do so. You've got the long-term capital gains locked in. If you want to hold it for 15 years, you can do so as well. That 800 grand is dialed in and locked in at long-term capital gains rates.
Now, Andy, you made a very important statement early on, and I want to loop back around to this because I had a pretty complex options case, and as a lot of advisors do in the financial planning realm, we ask the opinions of others, and we are on a mastermind group with Brookstone, and I had posed this question: does anyone have any other ideas for this NSO case that we're working? And one of the advisors had mentioned NUA, and it's pretty clear that there's a distinct difference between the option already being held on a brokerage style account and the NUA. So that's kind of going back to that 10% of advisors truly know the intricacies of this, but that's the key point. Number one, it has to be in that 401k, correct?
It does. And another thing that people get hung up on as well is they say, well, I don't have company stock. I have this stock fund. That'll work. I know a lot of companies you're not buying these shares per se because, if you're deferring, I don't know, $80 or something into the company stock, you can't buy a partial share. So they establish these stock funds. That's great. You can buy partial shares in a stock fund. When you proceed with NUA, that stock fund will essentially be converted to shares, and those shares will be journaled to your non-qualified brokerage account. So yeah, that's a good point. There's definitely some intricacies to how the NUA works, how the strategy works.
Now I know I'm going to get a question from a listener or two out there. What if you have stock that you feel is underperforming perhaps, or that you see you work for a technology company and you see something down the road that it's going to have, or you believe it's going to have a great appreciation in the future, and then you part company with your company? And is that something that people would want to look at, or does that not work?
Well, it could. I mean, if I work at company X and we're floundering, and I've been buying company stock in company X in my 401k, and I've got a little bit of appreciation or none at all, and if I were to leave that job and go to company Z, which I know is a rocket ship and it's going to do well, I can certainly join that 401k and I can buy that company stock, but it's going to take time. It's going to take time to get that appreciation. Assuming it's not one of these .coms back in the day that would go to the moon, but it's going to take time to get the appreciation so that I can ultimately take advantage of NUA, but you've got to have NUA and appreciation for it to work. I know some people will what they call reestablish basis. So if you've got if I've been working at a company, I've been buying company stock in my 401k, and it's crept up a little bit and crept up a little bit, and I've got a little bit of appreciation, and then for some reason it tanks. The market does poorly, the stock bottoms out. I can sell all my shares and then rebuy at the bottom. You don't have to worry about wash sale rules or anything like that in a 401k when you do this. Just sell it, rebuy it at a lower bargain basement price, and then basically start your NUA over again in the sense that start your appreciation growth and see how far you can take it before you do the NUA strategy.
Wow, that's great.
That's awesome.
Great, yeah. Yeah, one other thing too, you're mentioning the tax bump because, that $200,000 in an example, you're going to get a $200,000 increase to your income that year. But, if we're looking in using this to our advantage, if a client is saying, should I retire now or next year? And what if next year they're raising ordinary income rates, 5%? This may be a great time to hurry up and, hey, just, swallow the pill at the lower tax rate in that 1 year, right?
Absolutely. Yeah. And there's a bunch of ways. There's so many different ways you can manipulate the strategy to fit your needs. So, getting back to that $1 million person that would have the $200,000 income bump for that year. That person might say, hey, listen, Tom, listen, John, I can't afford it. I cannot afford a $200,000 hit. Well, you can do a partial NUA transaction. Maybe that person can only afford a $100,000 income. That's great. Take $500,000 of your shares. Directly transfer them into your non-qualified brokerage account. You're only going to have $100,000 of income that year. Now, the other $500,000 will get rolled over to your IRA, and we're going to talk about how that works. But that'll go to your IRA, and you'll forever lose the opportunity to do NUA on that. But at least you can be more efficient and effective with some tax planning if you just do a partial transaction. Right,
and that brings up a good point because there is. And maybe we can kind of use the example that you just did that the entire distribution has to happen in the same calendar year, correct?
Yes, absolutely. Once you activate it, and we'll talk about activation of NUA. Yeah, you have to get it done by December 31 or it's gone.
Okay. So, Tom, if you're good with this, I want to take a step back, Andy. To qualify for NUA, there's 4 triggering events. Can we talk about that?
Yes, absolutely. That's important. So, people might be listening and say, that's awesome. I love NUA. I've got company stock in my 401k. Let's go for it. It's not that easy. There's definitely some entry-level qualifications that you got to have to be able to qualify. You have to have a trigger event, and the trigger events are pretty basic. 59.5. So once you hit 59.5, that is an NUA trigger. Separation from service, that is a trigger event. Disability, but that's only for the self-employed, and death. So the biggies are 59.5 and separation from service. That's what we see most people using, but death will follow. You can't avoid it, so it's available to beneficiaries. NUA is available to beneficiaries, but yeah, the 59.5 and the separation from service are the key points. And I'll just talk through how it works. If I just put this out there as far as like the timeline. So I'm an employee. I've got my $1 million that we're talking about. I got my $200,000 in basis. I'm just still working along, having a good time at my company. I turn 59.5. My NUA light, as I imagine it, comes on. So that light is on. I've hit a trigger. Now I'm eligible to do NUA. I don't have to jump on it right now. That light will stay on in perpetuity as long as I don't do anything crazy in my account. So I hit 59.5. I've hit the trigger. My NUA light comes on. I'm ready to go. A couple years later, I haven't done anything in my account. I've continued to contribute to it, but I haven't done anything. I haven't taken anything out, done any Roth conversions or anything like that. Now it's 3 years later. My NUA light is still on, and I say I want to buy a bass boat. So I need some extra money. I take $10,000 from my 401k because I can take it in service distribution, and I buy my bass boat. That distribution that I took has now activated my NUA trigger. That light that was on is now flashing, which means I got to go now. I've got to do this NUA transaction this calendar year. If I don't proceed and do this whole thing now, at the end of the year, my NUA light will go off. Now, it's not the end of the world if the NUA light goes off. I've simply lost the 59.5 trigger. But a couple years later, I retire. I separate from service. My light's gone back on. So I just got to be aware of that. My light's on. I don't have to act right now. But if I do any transactions, let's see RMDs kick in. I got to go. And John, you had mentioned end of the year. The transaction for NUA is this. I mentioned the shares have to get journaled or transferred in kind to a non-qualified brokerage account. Everything else in the account, the non-NUA shares, are typically rolled over to an IRA. Bottom line is you have to empty the 401k. Lump sum distribution, everything's got to be out of the account before the end of the year. That's the magic action. If you can just do an NUA transaction and move the stock, but if you don't empty the account of everything else, you're going to fail the NUA test. So
this isn't something you can have a discussion with Uncle Stan on Christmas Day and expect to get it done.
No. We say our philosophy is do not start NUA after Thanksgiving because you're not going to get it done in time probably. So if your light's not flashing, wait till the next year.
Yeah, and earlier on, we used to, with Ed, we always used to say, after really October 1st, don't even try, because a lot of the brokerage houses and the HR people had no idea what this was, and it took a while. Sometimes it took 60 to 90 days to get these type of transactions completed. So you got to be very careful about that. Now, Andy, you said something about a distribution coming out to buy your bass boat, but a couple of other events like borrowing from your 401k or doing a Roth conversion, that's also going to set that light flashing, right?
Yeah. So just a normal distribution, like we talked about. If you have, like some people have 72T distribution set up on their 401k, you can do that. That'll activate the trigger. RMD, you could separate from service when you're 70. Your NUA light goes on, and you're just hanging out, and all of a sudden RMDs kick in, required minimum distributions, when you're 72, and they pay out to you automatically. Now your light's flashing. That activated it, and you might not even be aware of it. As would an in-plan Roth conversion.
Wow. And let me take that one more common example is you get a lot of these people that, they can do an in-service rollover after 59.5. So they've reached the 59.5 mark. They go to, advisor who doesn't know about NUA or a broker, and they're like, oh yeah, just roll that 401k over and we'll get you your 8% return every year. So they roll it over and they just triggered the NUA.
Thanks, Dave.
Yeah,
Ramsey.
absolutely, 100%. And not only have they triggered NUA, if they've rolled over the whole thing and they didn't even think about it, if they put those stock shares and they rolled them into the IRA, they just killed NUA, and you can't go back. Absolutely destroyed it. You cannot reset and put the money back in the 401k, and you can't get the NUA strategy once those shares hit the IRA. So
no do-overs.
Yeah, no. So I'm picturing in my head like a 401k statement. And it's easy to go right to the bottom of the page and put a big, highlighter on the 2.4 million. But it's so much more important to work yourself up the page and not only look at things like after-tax dollars and Roth dollars, but what are the holdings in that account? If I've got 1.5 million in company stock, I, as an advisor, better be asking that question about NUA.
Right. And one asterisk that could be put on one of the triggering events, because this is what I just had a client where we chose not to do NUA for various reasons, but one of them was the fact that she separated from service, so technically was retired from her company, but it was prior to age 55. So therefore, she's much younger than the 55, so she would get hit with that 10% penalty if we chose to do the NUA, because with that retirement, the asterisk has to be there that you also have to be 55.
There's a couple of nuances there. So yeah, 55 is the magic age because of the age 55 exception. So if a person retires at age 55 or later, they can have access to their company dollars, so they don't have to worry about the 10% penalty exception. If a person hypothetically retired at age 50 or 45 or what have you, and let's say that person had the $1 million and they had the $200,000 in basis, you'd have to have the NUA discussion to see if it makes sense, because If they did proceed, if this younger person did proceed with an NUA transaction, and they said had all the million come into their non-qualified brokerage account, and they had to pay ordinary income on the $200,000 in basis, the 10% penalty would only be applicable to the basis. So that person would have, in fact, a $20,000 penalty, the 10% penalty. But would that be worth it in compared to the tax savings for NUA? So that's where we get into the whole art of NUA, and there's a tipping point someplace. If you picture a seesaw, there is a tipping point somewhere where it makes sense, and what might make sense for one person might not make sense for another.
Right. So let me ask you this: let's take the example of the person who has an affinity for the company. He's retired, 75 years old, takes an RMD, right? So now that triggering event is over. Then he passes away.
There you go.
His spouse can then do an NUA with that 401k, correct?
As could his grandkids if they were the beneficiaries. Yeah, absolutely they could. So, using that scenario, that 75-year-old never takes his money out of the 401k. Let's say he separated from service, so was taking RMDs, so he killed his NUA trigger lights for 59.5. He killed his separation from service trigger, but now he dies. That light goes back on again. And it's a glowing light there for the beneficiaries to look at. And if that spouse or the grandchild, whoever is the beneficiary of that account, wants to pursue NUA, and if that NUA transaction makes sense tax-wise, absolutely, it is available to the beneficiaries.
And then with the non-spouse beneficiary designation, doing the NUA, you get out of that 10-year distribution rule for beneficiary IRAs.
Well, yeah, let's spin that one forward. Right? So that we got, you're right. You got the $1 million. Let's say it goes to the grandkid, the adult grandkid who's, 25, 30 years old. It goes into an inherited IRA account. He's got $1 million in there. He's got the 10-year rule. Grandpa was 75 taking RMDs. So now this kid's got to take 10 RMDs in years 1 through 9. He's blasting this money out of the account at whatever his ordinary income bracket is. If he had pursued NUA, he would have got hit with the $200,000 up front, but he would have locked in 15% capital gains, hopefully 15% on that $800,000. So definitely a possibility to get a little bit of a spread break in taxes there.
This thing could be so killer for somebody. It really could.
Yeah. And I'll tell you a funny story. And there are people out there that know about it. And I've heard stories that one advisor told me that he had a prospect come into his office, and the prospect was open and said, he goes, I've been to 4 different advisors, and I just want to see what they have to say. And he spread all his stuff out on the desk, and this advisor knew about NUA, and he was looking through his paperwork, and he goes, and the advisor asked the client, he said, I see you've got some company stock in your 401k. Have you heard about NUA? And the client raised an eyebrow and said, so you heard about that, have you? And this guy won the account simply because he knew about NUA. And this client was sneaky. He was fishing. Who knows about NUA? And he found that advisor, and he won the account for it.
Yeah, but I mean, smart move by the client prospect.
Yeah, yeah, for sure.
Now, because we were just on the topic of death, one thing that I would like to talk about is the cost basis and step up at death when we're doing some estate planning considerations. Can we just talk about that really quick, Andy?
Yeah. So there's no step up with NUA. That is locked in. So that $800,000 account, if that grandchild beneficiary that wants to do that transaction, they're not going to get a step up to the $1 million. If they do the NUA transaction, they're going to have the $200,000 tax, and they're going to have the $800,000 long-term capital gain. So that's certainly one thing to be aware of for beneficiaries, to make sure that they understand how that works and how it wouldn't work with a step up.
But then again, even if you lost a step up in basis, which you hate losing it, because of course we would love things tax free, but I'd much rather pay long-term capital gains rates than ordinary income rates, especially if as the beneficiary, I'm a higher income earner.
Absolutely, 100%. Yes, absolutely.
Or if you're a lower income earner right now and your capital gains rate is 0.
Yeah,
that's true. You can. I've seen people. I've seen people do that. They do the NUA transaction. They bite the bullet with the basis. They pay the tax on that basis, and then they're in such a low bracket they just slowly peel away, and they pay the 0% bracket if they can. So,
and Tommy, that's a great point you make, because again, what we preach to our clients is, even the beneficiaries are individuals that need their own planning. You just don't say, oh, you know what, I've got a million in non-qualified money that's going to receive a whole step up and $1 million in IRA money. I'm just going to just go 50-50 to each kid, when one kid may be a lower income earner. Maybe they're doing something they love and it's not a very high income salary and they're making, $60,000 a year. And then you have, your other child that's making $400,000. You're cutting in the IRS as a large beneficiary, because that high income earner is going to get a huge tax bill on top of their tax bill. So even kind of something like this, and Andy, correct me if I'm wrong, you could sit here and go, well, you know what? I've got this other non-qualified money that's going to receive the step up in basis. I'm going to leave that to my higher income earner child, because they're going to get the tax break there. And then my lower income earner child is going to be perfect for this non-step up in basis, because we can manage that to where they are not paying capital gains on this because of their income.
That's right. 100%. Yeah. You could say, I'm going to give my high earning child my Roth IRA because it's tax free. And I'm going to give my low earning child this large, you do the math to see what the value is, give them an equal value, but certainly give them maybe the Roth IRA to the higher earner and figure out how to do the NUA to the lower earning child. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, so a lot of different things. One thing I did want to mention, because I'm sure anybody that's listening is probably thinking about this, is, okay, I do the NUA transaction. I don't sell the stock right away once it's in my non-qualified brokerage account. What happens to the appreciation after the distribution? This is where, in my mind, I call it the NUA parfait. So you got a 3-layer parfait sitting in front of you in this nice glass, and the bottom level of that parfait is the $200,000 cost basis that we talked about. The next level of that NUA parfait is the $800,000 of appreciation that happened inside of the 401k. So now the $1 million has come out. But now that stock is still doing well. So now we've got appreciation after the distribution. That appreciation would need to be held for 1 year before it gets the long-term capital gains rate. So that's the only thing to consider when it comes to, I know a lot of people think about the 1 year hold. Any appreciation after the distribution would be ordinary income unless it was held for 1 year. So just be aware of that third layer of the NUA dollars.
Right. Great point.
Now, let's, I know the answer to this, but let's get it out there for the audience, right? So I do an NUA, everything goes perfectly smooth, and then January 15th of the following year, I get a dividend from the stock.
Mm-hmm.
What happens?
Yeah, that's a good question. Great question, because that happens all the time. Dividends will trickle in, interest will trickle in. That will not disqualify NUA. So you got to do your lump sum distribution. You got to get everything out of the account before the end of the calendar year. But beyond some your control, sometimes stuff will trickle in. As long as you just take that out, you're good to go. And that actually leads me to another point. I've had people say, okay, I hit 59.5. I haven't left my company, but NUA really is attractive to me. So I'm going to go ahead and do the NUA transaction. Okay, go for it. They do the NUA transaction. Everything is well and good. And this person says, but I want to keep contributing to my plan. Can't do it. Once you do the NUA transaction and you've done the lump sum distribution and you've emptied the account, yes, dividends that trickle in can come out. Yes, interest can get paid out, but you can't go back in there and just start all over again with your salary deferrals and company match and stuff like that.
Now, is that for the rest of your career, or is that just in that 1 year?
For the rest of your career at that company, for that plan. Now, if you quit that job and went to another company and worked there for another 10 years, you could do NUA again if you had good appreciation in that other new company. But for that existing plan, once you choose NUA, you are basically tapping out of that 401k.
Right. Great point right there. So, Andy, we've talked a lot about the nuances of the NUA, but for the listener out there, who really is a good candidate for NUA?
Anybody that has company stock in their 401k, number one. So if you have company stock, yes, you could be a good candidate. Secondly, is it highly appreciated? And I said earlier, that's a subjective point. I've had people say that they've got $50,000 in basis and they've got a $200,000 total value of the stock. 150 grand might not be worth it to some people. Other people say, yes, I'm going to pursue NUA. So is it highly appreciated, and what do you consider to be highly appreciated in your own mind? Maybe 50 grand basis, you need 500,000 for it to be worthwhile to you. So that's number two. And number three, just think about your age. Are you nearing a trigger point? We talked earlier about being 55 or being earlier. Just think about if a trigger is imminent, so to speak.
Right. And then obviously you need the ability to pay the taxes.
100%. Yes.
And that really could, for some people where they can't pay the taxes, that might just be, all right, well, then your other option is no NUA.
Absolutely. Yeah. If you cannot pay the taxes, it's just like if I want to do a Roth conversion, I can't afford the taxes. Well, then you're out, assuming you don't pay it from the IRA conversion. But yeah, absolutely, you got to have the money to be able to pay the taxes. But again, I mentioned earlier, you might not be able to do the whole thing, and you can do a partial. You can certainly do a partial NUA transaction, and maybe help yourself save some taxes on that deal.
Right.
And we're talking long-term tax savings too, not just for today. And we all know 2026 tax rates are going higher, and likelihood is they're going to go higher again. So if you're looking at this for a much longer term, and even if you're looking at this, like we were just saying a little while ago, generational planning, you could be saving literally hundreds of thousands or millions of dollars over a generation or two.
Yeah, and in terms of even generational planning, you can gift. You have gifting strategies, you have charitable remainder trusts. We could teach, we could do this podcast for hours, right, Andy?
Absolutely. We talk about generational. I think about a person that's working, and their entire history of their work, they might go through generations of businesses. There could be, acquisitions, buyouts. What's nice about NUA is that doesn't ruin NUA. See, people ask that question. Well, I started working at, this company, and they got bought by this company, and the stocks were changed over to this company. You still have a basis, so you can still use NUA. So mergers aren't going to hurt NUA either.
So anybody out there that used to work for Bell, and we went through 8,000 iterations of Bell Atlantic, Verizon, so on and so forth. I know I'm exaggerating a little bit here, but yeah, that's the kind of that's an example of what you were just saying.
Yep, absolutely. And you got to be careful too as well, because some people say, well, I've heard so many sneaky things. Well, I'm going to do the NUA transaction. I'm going to journal everything into my non-qualified brokerage account, and then I'm going to go ahead and within 60 days, I'm going to roll that stock into my IRA. No deal. That's not going to work. If you put that into the IRA, not going to work. I had one person, somebody call me and say that they separated from service, and they said, how long do they have to be retired for before they can go back to work? And I raised an eyebrow and said, are they trying to fake a trigger? And it was a person that it was a company owner that had a whole bunch of money in his company stock. He was going to quit, create a trigger of separation from service, and then come back to work 6 months later. I said, no way. You cannot run a scam NUA trigger like that. But there's all kinds of stuff going on out there. If you do it straight, and 99% of the people will do it straight, it can absolutely help the right people.
Right. And there's some people that just, long to be part of IRS publications.
Yep. If that person proceeded, he would definitely be in one of our manuals as he was behind bars telling his story.
And Ed would have a ton of jokes at his conference about that.
That's right. Exactly.
How will they know? And what is that?
Yeah, go ahead. You can tell it.
Ask the guy in the cell next to you.
That's an Ed area there. How would they know that I'd fake this transaction? I don't know. Ask the guy in the cell next to you.
Now, Andy, I want to go back to one of the triggering events, because you made another key point earlier. When it comes to total and permanent disability, you said that was on self-employed.
Yeah, the disability trigger is only for the self-employed person.
So you can be an employee. Let's say you sustain, some type of, permanent disability, and you're 50. That's not gonna, and you do qualify in terms of the NUA having that highly appreciated stock, whatnot. But you're totally disabled, but you're going to be subject to that 10% penalty if you try to do NUA because you didn't reach the age 55.
Well, if you're disabled, you would be able to probably use the 10% disability exception as well. So you can definitely layer in some things there. Again, assuming I'm self-employed and I become permanently disabled, I could use NUA, and I could probably also use the the disability exception. So that would work. I have not seen, in all my time, I've not seen anybody use NUA that was self-employed that became disabled. The ones that we always see are, of course, 59 and a half and separation from service, and then death does come up occasionally. Sadly, I think that most beneficiaries are simply not aware of the NUA possibility. But I will say I've not seen a disability one yet.
But when you say self-employed, so now you're talking about private company stock and not publicly traded company stock, right?
Yeah, that's what I mean. That's probably why there's just so many nuances to that where it just doesn't fit. You're absolutely right, Tom.
Yeah. So we've talked about all these nuances, but let's, if we can finish up, if it's okay with you, Tommy, let's talk about everything's going along smoothly. The plan is, we're mid-year, we're retiring, all the triggers are met, and they want to implement the NUA. What are some things that they must do, in the terms of, they have to notify their plan administrator and things like that they really have to go down the list and check the boxes on?
Yeah, good question. I always recommend, because people will call me, Andy, I want to do NUA. I got a client. I said, what do we do? I said, call the plan. Call the plan. Tell them what your intent is. They will have their own protocols built in. They might have a form for you to fill out. But yeah, number one, call the plan and let them walk you through their process. Typically, they'll have, like I said, a form. You fill it out, you send it in, and they will go ahead and process the NUA transaction as they normally do. Most plans are aware of NUA. Once in a while, you might find a plan that doesn't know what they are or what that is. Also, talk to your tax advisors and the CPAs out there, because not every tax person knows what NUA is. I've seen problems with that before. But step one, contact the plan, find out what their protocols are.
Right, and then expect 2 transactions. Right, there are the 2 separate transactions.
That's right. You're going to have the transfer in kind to your brokerage account. You're going to have typically the rollover of everything else to the IRA. So yeah, it's definitely a couple of things, a couple of moving parts here. That's why we talk about not doing it too late in the year. One thing that I've heard a couple of times, and it's super frustrating, is when a plan has not tracked cost basis. I felt so bad for one person where a guy had worked at a company for 30 years, and he had been contributing to the company stock for years and years and years and years, and he knew he had significant appreciation, but it was not documented at the plan. If the plan doesn't have it, if you have it, if you as the participant have that, if you have proof, that'll work. I've had people, typically cost basis is just an average cost basis of all the shares that you bought. If you want to do specific shares with cost basis, you can do that. If you know what shares you bought, if you bought a bunch of shares at a lower price and then the stock went up and you bought more at the higher level, but then went back down and you bought more at the lower level, if you can do specific identification, you can just pick the lower cost shares and leave the other ones to roll over. So that's a possibility as well. But it all comes down to documentation and what proof you have. Hopefully, the plan has tracked your basis. Typically, they're going to do an average basis. But if they don't, if you have the proof, that'll work as well.
Okay, so let me play devil's advocate here. You've just been working. You don't know. You knew you had it, and you're doing your part, making the contributions, and then all of a sudden, like we see for a good number of people, that time comes where they're like, I've got to really learn about this stuff because now it's relevant. They don't have any records. And in your example, the company doesn't have any records. The IRS just isn't going to accept that, right?
Yeah, you got to have proof. You got to have proof. And some people try to recreate it, like they save their pay stubs so they know what their pay stubs were. They know what they put into the 401k. So they research what was the stock price back then, and they try to back into what their cost basis was. That's a massive effort and responsibility to try to rebuild that. But ultimately, if you don't have it, and if the company merged a couple of times and changed custodians and 401k plans a bunch of times, and that information is gone, then unfortunately, you're just out of luck.
Wow. So that's a good thing for listeners. Hey, after you listen to this, call up your plan administrator. Make sure they got the cost basis rolling, right?
Absolutely. 100%. Yes.
And then in the end, sorry, Tommy, go ahead.
No, I had 2 quick questions. One is, Andy, what would you say are the 1 or 2 things that you see most often happen that blow the NUA? And then the second question is, NUA does not apply to the Obama tax, correct? Obamacare tax.
I am not sure about that, as far as the tax. That one I can't. Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah. You're right. I apologize. Yeah, you're right. The 3.8 tax does not apply to NUA. I apologize. I just didn't understand where you're going with that one. But yeah, 100%. 3.8 does not apply to NUA. I talked about the NUA parfait and any appreciation after the distribution. Any future appreciation will be subject to that 3.8 surtax, but the actual appreciation, the NUA, does not. So yeah.
And by 3.8, you guys are referring to the net investment tax.
That's right. The net investment income tax. That's exactly what we're talking about. And as far as your first question, what do I see that blows up NUA? It's a combination of not knowing about it and doing some sort of transaction, some sort of innocent, innocuous transaction, like a in-plan Roth conversion or a bass boat distribution purchase that ruins NUA. That's it. It is the most basic of things. It's not a huge explosion. It's just a little spark that makes that light flash, the NUA light flash. And then if you don't get it done by the end of the year, it's gone.
Yeah. Now, in closing on this, after they implement it, there are a couple things that the client has to be aware that they're going to get, right? Number one, they're going to get a 1099-R for the distribution of the company's stock, right?
Yes.
And then the other thing is, especially, and I've seen CPAs that weren't well versed when it comes to this executive compensation, is from what I've seen, you're also going to complete Form 4972 when you're doing your taxes.
I don't think you need to do that with it. You may need to do that with executive compensation, but not with NUA, because NUA is going to be all reported on that 1099. Everything that you need to know is going to be on the 1099. Now, you're going to have to net a couple of things together. It'll show the distribution, the taxable amount, like in our example was the $200,000. NUA will be on there. So you'll have a couple of different boxes on the 1099, but that's all you will need to file your taxes, because it will be all on that 1099-R form.
Right. Okay. Great. Tommy, you got anything for Andy left?
No, I think I covered everything from my end.
And I mean, folks, again, we haven't even talked about charitable remainder trust, gifting. I mean, there's just so much more that, we could really just make your head explode.
If we haven't already.
Yeah. So, Andy, phenomenal show. I mean, just another show that just flew right by. Great information, important information, because, and we say this time and time again, investments are important, but it's the planning that can add a ton of value, and taxes matter. So,
hey, listen, you save somebody all that money in taxes, that's better than any rate of return. It's an infinite rate of return.
Yeah. I mean, and we've had clients where not only do we save them in taxes that are, your transparent taxes, the ordinary income tax, but we've gone back and had clients petition Medicare, and they've saved on that Medicare tax, also known as a premium. And we've added, tens of thousands, if not tens of thousands of dollars just in a few years to clients' portfolios that would have otherwise been lost to the taxman. And there's the only difference between tax loss and market loss is you're not recouping tax loss. That's done and gone forever. All right, folks, that's going to wrap it up for another episode of the Retire Happy podcast. I want to thank Andy for coming on and talking about this complex subject matter and also simplifying it. I mean, you did a great job, Andy.
Yeah, for sure.
Thanks, guys. I appreciate it. I had a good time.
Andy, thanks. Really appreciate you doing this for us.
And so, folks, if you have questions on executive compensation, NUA, and you need help, give Tommy or I a call. We'll be more than happy. We have experts like Andy in our corner to help us with the precise planning that needs to be taking place. So with that, another great show. I would love to have Andy on in the future. Andy, if you come back and we can talk about some other intricacies of NUA or anything else with an IRA.
All kinds of good stuff out there to talk about, for sure.
All right, folks. Well, that's going to wrap it up. Until then, enjoy your what's left of the summer and enjoy that peace of mind in retirement. Take care, folks.
It's easy to get in touch with John and Thomas. If you're more on the West Coast, give John a call at 858-935-6210. That's 858-935-6210, or go online to GoSecurus.com. That's GoSecurus.com. If you're more of an East Coaster, then call Thomas, 973-394-0623. That's 973-394-0623, and online at internationalfinancial.com. That's internationalfinancial.com. And you can, of course, always just check the description or the show notes section of today's show for all that contact information. Don't forget to subscribe on your favorite podcasting apps, and we'll see you next time on the Retire Happy Podcast.
Investment advisory services offered through Brookstone Capital Management, LLC BCM, a registered investment advisor. BCM, Securus Financial, and International Financial Advisory Group are independent of each other. Insurance products and services are not offered through BCM, but are offered and sold through individually licensed and appointed agents. The opinions expressed by John Iamarino, Thomas O'Connell, and guests on this show are their own and are based upon information considered reliable, although it should not be relied upon as such. Any statements or opinions are subject to change without notice. Investments involve risk and, unless otherwise stated, are not guaranteed. Past performance cannot be used as an indicator to determine future results. Any strategies mentioned may not be suitable for everyone. Information expressed does not take into account your specific situation or objectives and is not intended as recommendations appropriate for you. Before acting on any information mentioned, please consult with a qualified tax or investment advisor to determine if it is suitable for your specific situation. This program is designed to provide accurate and authoritative information with regard to the subjects covered.